Hi, I'm Ken Jacobson, one of the programmers for DocLands, and I'm here with the director of All Light Everywhere, Theo Anthony. Welcome, Theo. Congratulations on the film, and thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So in introducing you, I quoted the New Yorker's Richard Brody, who described your previous film, Rat Film, as being a, quote, extraordinary visionary inspiration, unquote. Can you tell us a bit about what the inspiration was for All Light Everywhere and maybe give us a glimpse into your creative process? I'm very curious to hear a bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's like, how much time do you have? Yeah, I mean, I think with Rat Film, it was very easy to pinpoint the genesis of the project for me. You saw the beginning of the film. There was this rat in a trash can. I had it on my iPhone and kind of started this whole journey. And this film feels like it had a lot of different inception points. And in many ways, I think that all of the work that I'm doing right now are just different ways of getting at these larger ideas. I think that maybe most literally the genesis of this film came from just living and being in Baltimore following the killing of Freddie Gray and the uprising there, and just being on the ground and seeing the conversations around policing and attempts to reform the police. And I just at the time, one of the biggest things that was being pushed through was this body camera legislation requiring all police officers to wear body cameras. And I didn't know anything about body cameras, and the more that I looked into it, the more compelling connections I found. Obviously, I saw the film. It's made by Taser, and I think my films are just always this really earnest journey of as an audience, you're following me as I'm learning about these things and making these connections. And I always try to give space for the audience to make their own connections and not try to portray myself as some sort of expert. I don't start out as an expert, and I'm not an expert now. I'm just just kind of tunneling through all this material and making connections. And the hope is the audience follows along with me.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different elements or parts to the film, and they're all so rich in and of themselves, and then they kind of somehow relate to each other. I'm curious about the historical element, the transit of Venus in 1874, and when you kind of started to delve into the history behind that, and also just there were so many rich visuals associated with that, and just talk a bit, if you can, about your journey as far as that that historical event.
Yeah, I think again, it's hard to just sort of talk about any sort of causality, right, with these things. It's just like you sort of have to dive in, and you find that everything is connected to everything else. I think I'll start with like two books that were just sort of very inspirational to me. One was this book called 10 to the Second by Jimena Canales, and she's this incredible historian and philosopher of science who sort of really unearths all these tools and sort of how different ideologies are embedded in the tools, and really focusing on like the mid 19th century. So that was like she writes a lot about the transit of Venus, and I owe a lot of my different threads to her. And there's another book called Dark Matters on the Surveillance of Blackness by Simone Brown, which is just this kind of attempt to update like the Foucault's panopticon studies of sort of centering race and when we talk about surveillance. And I think Simone Brown does this amazing job of really looking at how these tools always progress side by side with these like colonial ways of seeing the world, of interacting with the world, of extracting and exploiting value from the world. So those were really rich resources. Just on a really ground level, I was really into body cameras. The eclipse was coming up. I started reading about the eclipse. I found all these compelling connections where I I had found out about the photographic rifle through, I mean, a lot of people who take, you know, cinema history 101 will learn about that. But for those, you know, for those of us who didn't, like myself included, that was like a really cool thing to find out. And just realizing that the sun, which is the source of light and all that we, you know, can see in the world with our eyes, like, you know, has always been this inspiration for these different tools. And now obviously that goes way, way back, you know, beyond just like the middle of the 19th century. But I thought it was just really interesting to dwell on that moment and just follow this one trail of breadcrumbs forward.
Do you find because you referenced two books, do you find in some ways, you know, that the written word is maybe often a starting point for you rather than a visual? Or what kind of sparks your creativity the most, would you say? Not that you have to pick one, but just let us know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I read a lot and I watch a lot of reality TV, and like those are like my two. Like I am really, really bad at, like, I obviously love movies. I love it, but like I'm not a cinephile. I haven't seen the canon. I'm like constantly, you know, people are just saying to me like, "You haven't seen that?" I'm like, "No," but like, have you seen season 28 of Survivor? Like that is cinema history, you know? And I mean that like in an earnest way. But I draw a lot of, I think that like the written word has this incredible, I mean, so much like this. It has this incredible affordance given to it to explain, so like to explore many different tangents. The written word allows you to be immersed in a way that I think that we don't allow ourselves with filmmaking. I think with film, we're really expecting, you know, for the film to deliver us to a certain outcome, you know, and we're really kind of strapped in along for the ride. I like the feeling of being a little lost in the text, and you have the footnotes that you have to follow. Everything, you know, the text is so incomplete, and it's always requiring you as a reader to complete it. And that experience of processing information and learning about the world is something that I definitely would cite as like, yeah, like a major inspiration for my work. And I don't know. I mean, right now at least, I want to get a little less heady going forward, but like, you know, a little less writing, a little more just kind of sitting in images. But for now, yeah.
When you are reading one of these texts, do images kind of pop into your head, or how do you kind of match the, you know, what's on the written page and the ideas with the visuals that ultimately, you know, you're going to need to come up with to make a film?
Yeah, so that's like I mean, that's a really good question, and it's something that I'm always thinking about and always revising, is this kind of workflow. I've gotten to a point now where even in like the past few months, it's changed. Like I've realized understanding all this new software that helps me save information and better organize it. But just very roughly, I'm always reading and I'm always writing down things, and I'm always making sure that I'm connecting what I'm reading to another thing. And I think that like no one of these things in the film is novel or like, you know, I'm not breaking new ground, but I think that, you know, what is really exciting is to put things that haven't really been put together before. Like, you know, that idea of, I don't think there was that much writing about, you know, people linking taser and body cameras to the photographic rifle. That was like, there's a lot of writing about both, but that connection, I hadn't seen it yet. You know, I could be totally wrong. But so yeah, when I'm reading, when I'm watching something, I'm constantly writing down an image that comes to mind, a story that it reminded me of. And just the goal is that like you leave breadcrumbs for yourself, and just got to make sure that like you, A, like those breadcrumbs are going to stay there, and B, that you remember that you left breadcrumbs in the first place. So I'm constantly developing better systems and better systems at leaving breadcrumbs.
Well, something that was more like a whole loaf of bread in the film was the sequence, you know, that you shot at Axon International with Steve Tuttle, the spokesman there. Talk to us a bit about. I mean, I have to ask you how the heck did you get access to Axon? You know, or I guess phrased another way, what the heck were they thinking?
Yeah. Well, I think the logic that you'll find with a lot of these technology companies is that I think that people, well, let me back up. I should say that I try to operate on good faith, and that like if even though I disagree with someone, I try to understand that they aren't necessarily, they don't wake up every morning thinking I'm going to be a horrible person. That person in their body and from their experience thinks that what they're doing is the right thing. And I mean, they could be totally wrong. It doesn't excuse that extremely horrible things that they do, but like, you have to believe that somewhere in their mind that they think that they're doing the right thing. And so what you'll find with a lot of these like surveillance or technology companies is they really think that they're doing the right thing, but they aren't aware of the context or the history of other people doing those things. And with body cameras in particular, there is this marketing language that is built around transparency and accountability. And these technologies are inserted with the assumption that they will provide a clear window on what's happening, and that in looking through that clear window, we will understand more about what's on the other side, and we'll be able to hold those people accountable to what's happening on the other side. I don't believe that's how it works, but that's just the marketing language of it. So when we approach these companies, what we say is like, in good faith, like, I think it's a good thing. I think transparency is a good thing. I think accountability is a good thing. I would love to see how you're being transparent and accountable. And what that happens is it places these companies in a position where they either oblige these requests or there's, you know, risk being hypocritical to the very thing that they're selling. I mean, I also think that like there's a huge amount of like, you know, privilege in my, you know, coming in, I look like a cop sometimes. I can talk with these people. These are people like I recognize as growing up with, and they probably see me as someone who, you know, maybe reminds me of like their son or something. So there's that dynamic as well. But yeah, so our strategy was really just to lean into the transparency, lean into the accountability, and just lean into the performance of that marketing language.
Was there a lot of back and forth there, or were they very receptive to the idea from the beginning?
No, it was months. It's like I think before I set foot in almost, you know, and that's another conversation. Like in almost every single scene that you see in the film, there's like months, sometimes even years of conversation with the people involved. You know, before we even bring a camera into the space. I think that's just where I'm at as a filmmaker. It's like I like to be very explicit with our boundaries and our limitations and what we're going to be doing, but also more importantly, what we won't be doing. And so, yeah, so like I gave Axon a shot list. I gave Axon our questions. I gave Axon a whole schedule of events. I let them recommend, you know, different locations for it. So it was like really, there is a little bit of collaboration in that sense, you know. And yeah, so I think that really helps, is just like having these, and the idea is that that's just like a structure for your shoot, and that you're moving along, but you're always looking for kind of like cracks in the structure. And those are the most important, like the most like magical moments, like when that kind of framework breaks apart. So yeah, I think that like sometimes when I talk about it, people think I'm like reduced my shoots to like this really cold calculus, but actually like the framework, the scaffolding is just there to improvise on top of. And, you know, it just helps facilitate conversation with the subjects as well.
You know, you talked about connections earlier, and, you know, how, you know, there are elements in the film that you're sort of putting together in the same film in a way that maybe is, you know, new. It's interesting to me, you know, that Axon is the maker of the taser and the body cam. So essentially a gun and a camera. So they themselves are putting those two things together in the same factory. And as you show in the film, you know, looking for ways to connect those things via the internet and the capturing of data. But what seems to be missing from the public dialogue that, is an outcry around police tactics, behavior, and accountability is, Axon itself and those tools have not really been the center of too much of that public discourse. And I'm just curious, how do you, how do you see the technology itself playing a role in this discourse about police tactics, behavior, and accountability? And shouldn't we be talking about this more?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think it's really hard to, it's really hard, when you're confronted with an image of someone being murdered, to take a step back and say, well, let's talk about the thing that's capturing the murder. You look at the Rodney King incident, you look at the Rodney King beating, and how that was portrayed. And there's you had something where the entire public is looking at an innocent man being beaten by police, but in a court of law in an entirely different interpretive context, it doesn't rise to the level of prosecution. And that's the, so we say again and again, how do these injustices happen? It's because we have these different interpretive frameworks that are, where we have a cultural conversation, we have a political conversation, these creative conversations, and they're it's not the only reason, but there's not enough overlap to understand how these things can have different interpretations in different contexts. It doesn't change the fact that someone was murdered, it doesn't change the fact that someone was beaten on camera, but our entire system of justice isn't based on an affective response. We have a for better or for worse, a legal protocol for handling these things. So that's all to say, tools and technologies, no tool is ever going to solve a problem. And I think that what you see is a lot of these tools are, there's this thing called, surveillance creep, which is when you have, these tools which are developed in military context, when, the conflict is no longer profitable, they're then being sold to local police departments, which further bloat police budgets, driving really scarce resources away from education, from infrastructure projects. It's not uncommon for police budgets to take up 40 to 50% of municipal budgets, and that's just unreal. So it's we see these tools that are then being sold, which are very expensive. They're not one-time things. They come with subscriptions like Axon, which are just draining resources. And so if we are only looking at tools to solve a problem, we're just further punting the ball down the road. And I think that a question that I've encountered a lot already with this film, and one that I anticipate encountering a lot more, is, are you for or against body cameras? And I think that what I try to say to that is, there's actually a question before that we need, that question skips. And the more important question is, what are these body cameras empowering? Could that budget be used for something better? And if these cameras, how much do these cost, and what could those resources better be used for? Because if we are only inflating policing budgets, we are further optimizing a broken system. And that is, so that's one branch path. Unfortunately, as you saw in the film, over half of, police departments in the US already have a body camera program in place. And we're actually working on a policy toolkit right now that we'll be releasing. I've become quite involved with writing body camera policy and use of force policy in my hometown and my county, and been working with people. But there's some very practical things that you can do if you already have body cameras, which is making sure that it records both audio and video, making sure that police officers can't review body camera footage before making a sworn statement that would retroactively justify use of force, making sure you have clear evidence release policies. And then most importantly, having an audit cycle at the end of these contracts to make sure did use of forces go down? Did community relations go up? Did this actually instill any more trust in police? And if not, get these things out of here. And we need to do something else. And so, yeah, just focusing on technology is like, it's just a hammer in search of a nail. And it's like, you just have to, there has to be like a step back from these conversations to understand that like, there's something way, way more fundamental that needs to be broken, that needs to be fixed. And yeah, really, really long answer, but it's really wrapped up in a lot of the stuff that I'm pursuing right now. And yeah.
Well, I'm great to hear. It's great to hear you're doing that work. I think it's really important, and look forward to hearing more about some of the outcomes of that. I know we're running short on time, but I have to ask you about another technology in the film, the persistent surveillance systems, and Ross McNutt, who co-founded that company. That scene of the community meeting in Baltimore is just pretty mind-blowing. We could have spent this whole conversation and then some talking about it. I guess I'm going to just boil it down to one thing, which is I'm curious what changed, and these could be different answers. You could pick one. What changed for Ross in your perception, or you or your crew, between the time you guys entered that room, that space, and when you left? Because a lot went down. And I'm just curious, about that difference, that space in time between the before and the after.
Yeah, I don't know how much changed between Ross and I. I think for us, like the entire film changed for the crew. It just, I was talking before about this kind of really procedural framework that I, build when I'm making my films, having very explicit and clean, like demarcations of we're going to film from here to here. This is our shot list, and months and years of conversation leading up to filming. The community meeting was the only time that we weren't able to do that. That's not a scene that I would normally seek out to film unless I knew everyone in that room already going forward. It was Ross invited us to go. He said that he was presenting, he was presenting at this Simmons Baptist Church in West Baltimore, and we didn't know if it was like right for us to go or like if it would be even relevant. And it ended up being like really like the heart of the film, I think, in that we can make all these clean models and we can like splice it up as clean as we want, but like, at the end of the day, like if you're sort of not implicating yourself in some way, you're kind of like missing the point. The entire film kind of starts with this image of the blind spot. It talks about all these historical blind spots and the way that in which power has exploited these blind spots for its own agenda. And that was a moment where like the people in that room, like, were not only speaking really passionately and really like forcefully back at Ross, but also at us, also at us coming into that space. And we thought that it was really important to include that and to, try to like honor the spirit of that. I think that like there was just so many emotions. It was like there was anger, there was passion, there was like humor, there was so much going on, and we didn't want to reduce it or boil it down. We wanted to like preserve that like central messiness of that scene. And for something that is like, for a film that's all about exactitude and like, these precision of these instruments and this clear window on truth, that I think that messiness or that uncertainty is actually really important for unsettling old frameworks and imagining maybe different outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting, it's interesting to hear about that messiness, and I think it really just brought the film to a whole other place. And I just applaud you for being a part of that messiness and being bold enough to include it in the film as you did. And unfortunately, we are out of time. There's so much more to talk about with you about this film, because it's elegant, it's beautiful, it's messy, it's thought-provoking. It's a call to action, I think, in many ways, but it's also a reason to go deeper, as you clearly have in your own creative process. And I'm sure I speak for all of our audience when I say we can't wait for your next project. And thank you so much for being with us today. Congratulations on the film. It's really wonderful.
Thanks so much.
And thanks to Stella for her interpreting today. And we encourage everybody to check out our lineup at DocLands. Take care. Thank you.